How hard can it be to make a telegraph? Ooh. Oh. Hey there, I'm Sabrina, and this is History Remade with Sabrina. In each episode, we deep dive on an iconic object in history and explore the interesting engineering behind the build. Today, we're remaking Samuel Morse's telegraph to figure out how a simple series of dots and dashes changed the way the world communicates. Beep, 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 beep. That joke was a lot funnier when I wrote it at 2 a.m. Alright, the telegraph, your cell phone's cool great-grandparent. Nowadays, it's pretty easy to take quick communication for granted between emails, texts, social media, yelling really loudly across the room. Hi, Melissa!
Hi, Sabrina!
Like, it is easier than ever to instantaneously communicate with somebody anywhere in the world. But it wasn't always this way. Here's how the telegraph changed communication. For most of human history, communication was limited by physical delivery or sightlines, but small improvements to these systems served as a major advantage over time. Consider the semaphore network used by Napoleon. Messages were conveyed by the positioning of the arms and relayed through the network, allowing Napoleon to coordinate his troops faster than his enemies to such success that some consider it his secret weapon. From growing empires to blossoming nations, the advantages of faster communication were clear, but the technological capability was limited, until the advent of electromagnetism in the 1800s, allowing us to realize mechanical action at electric speeds. Early explorers sought ways to apply and improve the technology, including Joseph Henry, who found ways to build stronger electromagnets and maintain current across larger circuits. These developments unlocked many new possibilities, including a little idea conceived by Samuel Morse in 1832, the electric telegraph. He wasn't the first in the world to imagine nor create such a communications device, but his relatively simple design was the first to secure a patent in America. With a little assistance, his system dominated the continent and eventually the world. Quite quickly, messages that once needed days or months to travel using boats, trains, and carriages could now be communicated in a matter of hours with a simple dash, dot dash, dot dash dash dot. Today, we are building a working telegraph that uses the same fundamental components of Morse's design. Now, I'm not going to promise an exact replica because that's really hard to do. There were a bunch of iterations on the design, and the first version would be pretty unrecognizable from what you've seen on movies or TV, but we're going to try our best.
Do you know Morse code?
No, I'm not 100. I use a cell phone. Let's go.
Take one.
Alright, so with every build, we're going to be focusing on exploring time-accurate techniques over time-accurate materials. So we're going to be using things that you could grab at your local hardware or craft store. For this build, we're going to be using the following. Now, it might be useful for you to know how a telegraph works on a basic level to contextualize the rest of this build. Basically, you're going to be using an electromagnet, which, for our purposes, is basically just a magnet you could turn on and off. You do that using a switch. That's the thing that people tap on to create a pattern that corresponds to letters. Now, in the on position, the electromagnet attracts a piece of metal. Let's imagine the electromagnet is right here. It attracts a piece of metal, making it hit something and make a clicking sound. Click. In the off position, the metal is released back into its natural position, hitting something again and making a clacking sound, like clack. The click doesn't matter more than the clack, it's just, there's this consistency. And that's because when the action is done quickly, click, clack, that is a dot. When the action is done slowly, click, clack, that's a dash. Now, don't worry if that was a lot. I'll go over it again throughout the build, which breaks down into 5 steps. Making the key, making the sounder, making the battery, connecting the circuit, and sending a message. Let's move on to step 1, making the key. Now, the key is that tappy bit of the telegraph. At its most basic level, it's just essentially 2 pieces of conductive metal. When you connect them, you actually allow a current to pass through. So when they're connected, this is the on position. When you separate them, that connection is broken, so this is the off position. Now, obviously, doing this is neither efficient or safe, so Morse and Vail made a more ergonomic design. And here are the pieces of that design. So you'll notice that this lever bit has a piece of metal on it, and there's a piece of metal here. The goal is to get them to touch, but you don't want them touching constantly or else it's always gonna be in the on position. So they made a little bit of a metal lever that's made of sheet metal. I don't wanna cut my hands, so we're putting on safety gloves. We love safety here. So this piece of sheet metal kind of acted as a spring. You'll notice that if this is levered here, it'll just keep falling down and it'll constantly stay in the on position, which you don't want because you can't really send a message in patterns if it's always on. So this piece of sheet metal will go here and it's gonna rest like that. We're gonna get some hammering going.
Wait. Speaking of safety, should we be wearing like goggles or something?
Probably. First try. Nice. Next thing, it's time to attach this bad boy. Now we're gonna use nuts and a series of bolts. I can do this by hand. I'm gonna try and do it by drill. No, that was the right way. Go, got her. Got her. I just need to get all these pieces lined up, and then my galaxy brain plan may work. Might not, but might. Is my master plan working? Is it moving?
Yes,
Check this out. So when the lever is at rest, nobody's touching it, these bolts are not connecting. So that is the off position. Now, if I press down, they do touch. Now it's in the on position. But if I want to release, flicks right back up, back into the off position. Ergonomic, fantastic. Let's move on to step 2. Making the sounder. Now, here's the thing. When you see a telegraph system in movies, the person on the receiving end is usually in front of some sort of machine, right? And they're listening intently, and they're writing out this direct translation. Well, that's the sounder, and we're going to be building that, but interestingly, it isn't the original way to receive a telegraph. So do you remember how the receiver works? I mentioned it at the start of this video, but basically there's an electromagnet, and it attracts a piece of metal downwards, making it hit something. This causes a clicking sound. Click. When that electromagnet is turned off, the metal is no longer attracted to it, letting it tilt back up to its original resting position, tapping a resting piece and making a clacking sound. Clack. Now, if this happens quickly, on, off, click, clack, that is a dot. If it happens slowly, on, off, click, clack, that is a dash. But think about it, dots and dashes, why would we use such a visual reference for an audible event? Well, that's because when Morse and Vail first released their telegraph system, that receiver mechanism actually wrote out the dots and dashes. That click-clack sound was just a byproduct of the action. However, once telegraphs really rolled out, operators got so good at translating that they were able to do it based on the click-clack sound alone. Thus, the design of the receiver changed to focus on making that sound as audible as possible, hence the term sounder. Anyway, this whole thing of moving metal and making sound relies on the idea of turning an electromagnet on and off. And that is where electromagnetism comes in. I know that this is a history show, but I promise some physics isn't gonna hurt. So back in the 1800s, a bunch of scientists noticed that electricity and magnetism were related in an interesting way. When an electric charge is moving, it has a magnetic field. It's the same phenomenon that exists within just a normal magnet. There's this magnetic field that orients the electrons in the metal to all point in the same direction so that it is attracted to the magnet. With that in mind, let's talk about electromagnets. Now, when a charge is moving along a straight wire, the magnetic field looks like this. So if the current's going this way, it would look like this. This process is called the right-hand rule. It tells you the way the magnetic field looks, but also is an easy way to spot a physics student. Now, when you coil the wire, the magnetic field lines get focused in the center. Now, theoretically, a single coil can operate just like a bar magnet as a result of these magnetic field lines. However, that is way too weak. If you coil it multiple times, that does stack the effect, but even this is still super weak. But Morse learned from Joseph Henry that if you insert iron inside of this coil, it amplifies the field even more so that when our switch is on and there is a current flowing through, It really is about the same power as a basic bar magnet. And when our switch is off, the magnetic field goes away, and this kind of just becomes like an interesting design choice. I hope that made sense. Anyway, I've pre-assembled our sounder just because the electricity and the electromagnets get a little bit finicky. Electricity is hard. For example, this lever needs to be just slightly off equilibrium, hence this weight back here. We needed to do just a bunch of high school physics to realize how much this counterweight needed to weigh. Ooh, what a throwback. So if I bring this magnet in, it's kind of like turning the electromagnet on. And so we should expect to get our click. And if I remove the magnet or turn the electromagnet off, we will get our clack. Click, clack. It's a very small movement. All right, that's enough for step 2. It's time for step 3, making the battery. Early telegraph circuits used batteries made of a glass jar filled with chemical solution and some electrodes, making what is just a much wetter, less efficient version of the stuff you could get at the stores. So because of that, I confess this step is a bit of a misnomer. I am not making a battery. I don't want to sneeze and accidentally knock over my electricity juice. So I'm just going to use a 9-volt battery. We've created a little mount. We've even marked the terminals. And we've got these cute little cap to help us wire things in. While I'm fessing up to things though, I should probably add that I've been saying that we're making a telegraph when really a telegraph is any device used to communicate a long distance through coded symbols. Napoleon's semaphore network used telegraphs. Gesturing with a boat flag is a telegraph. I mean, if I just waved at you, I guess my arm is a telegraph? Anyway, what we're making right now is an electric telegraph. We're using electricity to communicate a long distance through dots and dashes. With that off of my chest, let's get the electricity flowing with step 4. Connecting the circuit. A circuit is just a path along which electrons flow. In our case, we need the circuit to carry a charge from our key to our sounder. So where do we put our wires? Now, Morse originally intended to have all of the telegraph wires laid underground. And in 1843, with government funding, he planned to connect Washington and Baltimore. He brought his wires to Ezra Cornell, yes, that Cornell, and they laid it out only to find out midway through that the wire didn't work. It had like faulty insulation or something. They had wasted so much time and money, but still had a deadline to meet. So instead of restarting, Cornell was like, let's just string the wires overhead on trees and poles. Oh, what well-spaced poles. It's my bad. For the people who are concerned, the batteries aren't connected, so it's all good. This is just a bunch of metal string, essentially. Now, obviously, hanging the wires overhead wasn't ideal. It's not what he wanted to do initially. But after he did it, a funny thing happened. People got really hyped up by the visibility of these wires because it meant something special. It meant that their communities were important enough to be a part of this network. And everybody would know that because these poles were unavoidable to look at. And so after he initially laid these wires overhead and people got into it, it became the norm. It's how the telegraph network continued to spread over time, and eventually, when phones came around, they followed the same route. Anyway, these overhead lines needed clearings to pass between cities. Fortunately, Morse's telegraph network wasn't the only attempt at connecting the country at the time. The Transcontinental Railroad and the Irish and Chinese immigrants who built it had cleared paths between every major hub in the country. And since railway operators wanted a more efficient way to communicate with various stations and coordinate trains, choo-choo! The telegraph network expanded alongside the Transcontinental Railway. I have so many trains in my butt. That's not a good line to say for the internet. With the subsequent popularity of the telegraph, in 1858, the network expanded one step further across the Atlantic Ocean, connecting Queen Victoria with President James Buchanan. This cut the communication time from 12 days in just one way to under 24 hours. Now, that's not because it took hours for a message to travel across the wires. The messages were like super garbled, so they kept needing to repeat themselves. It's the same vibe as making a call from an elevator, which isn't great, but it's way better than sending a messenger on a boat and carriage. Want to help me illustrate the difference, Melissa? Okay, I need you to set a timer because we are gonna try out the old school method by just physically sending you some notes. Ready? You got a timer? You're gonna tell me when to go.
Where's my notebook? Okay, there it is. What message do I send? So I say something simple, basic. There we go. Let's fold it up for delivery. There's no clear path. There's so many things. Yeah, that's part of receiving a message. Hi. How much time?
34.61 seconds.
That's the time to beat. Let's move on to step 5.
Sending a message. Our electric telegraph communicates using Morse code, but interestingly, Morse didn't actually make it. It was Alfred Vail. Let me show you how it works. Basically, he assigned the complexity of the signal based on how often the letter was used in the English language. The more common, the simpler the code. So you'll see here that the letter E is just a single dot, and the letter T is a single dash. You can actually see how the alphabet branches out in this graph right here. So in this case, if I want to send that same message to Melissa that I wrote down, if I want to say hi, I would need 4 dots followed by 2 dots. Or if you remember how our sounder works, that would be click, clack, click, clack, click, clack, click, clack, a little pause, and then click, clack, click, clack. Got it?
Got it.
All right, because you're gonna need to keep an ear out for that, since that's the message I'm gonna send to you, and we're gonna compare it to our physical letter timing. Okay, so we're gonna plug it in. It's the moment of truth. I'm just worried it isn't gonna work. Okay. Ready? Set the timer. I think I feel ready for this.
Okay, ready? Go.
Woo! That's the Telegraph remade!
While working on this, I found myself constantly wondering, why didn't someone make the telegraph sooner? Not to say that the science underlying all of this was obvious, it wasn't. I still need to stop myself from calling electromagnetism magic. But it's just bizarre for me to imagine being okay with needing to physically send a message, wait for it to get where it's going, and then wait again for the response to come back in a few weeks, maybe. And I think my confusion, 1, shows my age. I'm certain some of y'all watching this still remember sending physical mail and using stamps. But more importantly, it emphasizes how literally every facet of our world is impacted by the legacy of the telegraph. Because it wasn't just messages between politicians, it was businesses improving their supply chain logistics because they didn't need to predict as far in advance, so stores had more of what people were looking for. It was train conductors working under safer conditions because they could know where other trains were and if there was damage to the tracks. It was banks operating nationwide, militaries coordinating with greater precision, and empires tightening their grip. That is to say that the telegraph extended figuratively, if not literally, to all corners of our lives, the good and the bad. And it shows us just how much more the world could be if we could just reach out to one another that little bit faster with landlines, and faster with cell phones, and faster with the internet, until we're where we are today, in a world where physically communicating was barely an option for 2 years. Video calls, telegraphs in their own sense, were all we had. And all of that started with a single tap. I'm so glad it worked. So I know I spent a lot of this video hyping up that click-clack sound effect only to end up with this. So we're gonna get you up close and personal using this tiny little lav mic. However, before I do that, leave a comment down below with whatever iconic object you think we should make next. And you know what? You know the shtick. While you're at it, hit like, share, and subscribe. But ready for this? Pull that all the way up there. Is she clicking? Is she clacking?
Clacking.
Don't know when to stop now.